On today's show, we are crossing it over with one of our divisional foes. On today's show, we are going to discuss the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning between the offseason, season prior, and what's to come with the Atlantic Division.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, with this special crossover edition of both the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Tampa Bay Lightning podcast, we are catching up with our foes in the Atlantic Division. For everyone on the Tampa Bay Lightning feed, let me introduce myself. My name is Armando Velez, the host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and very honored to once again be getting together with my counterpart on the Locked On Podcast Network, Mr. Adam Denker, the host of Locked On Lightning. Adam, great to be getting together with you, my friend.
Yeah, Armando, always a pleasure to get together and talk about Florida hockey. I mean, I think it's probably, especially the last 5 years, has been really one of the low-key storylines of the National Hockey League, and to be able to really be able to promote that, because I feel like even though, we've seen long playoff runs with our both teams, especially yours last season, I still don't think there's enough to talk. I still don't think there has been enough talk about it in really the mass media, especially around the league. So definitely looking forward to talking about that right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's been such a one-sided rivalry, too, if you want to call it that. They just happen to play in the same state. In order for it to be a rivalry, for the most part, you got to go back and forth with defeating one another in playoff series. Doesn't matter what happens in the regular season at all. For that to be spoken about more, and I think the best is yet to come. At least hopefully with these two franchises, and 3 out of 4 the last 4 Eastern Conference champions coming from the state of Florida. So the brand, the game has grown so much in this state. But let's talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning first. I want to ask you a lot about them as far as their offseason, just the last season overall, because I feel like as far as fan perception and even media perception of the Tampa Bay Lightning, I feel like the way the Tampa Bay Lightning were viewed were just a team that you just expect them to do what they need to do. Not necessarily coast to the regular season, doesn't need to be President's Trophy winning, doesn't need to be division winning even. And they were just quietly going about their business. I mean, Braden Point's 50-goal season wasn't really talked about much in the media. Kucherov had a 113-point season as well. Stamkos was over a point per game in last season as well. And still, the bill came due, just like it did for the Panthers. Lost a lot in the last few years. Yanni Gord, Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, Ross Colton just recently as well. So, and Vasilevsky, a 915 save percentage last season, but still not a lot of spotlight there for the Tampa Bay Lightning. At least that's how I felt, even though I'm very close by to that region. How do you feel about how the season was progressing for the Tampa Bay Lightning and then going into this offseason?
Well, I think if we're going to sum up the Lightning season, besides the month of February, where they were by far one of the best teams in the league, I think they lost like 3 games the entire month of February, which is insane. Really, this season was really just about just figuring it out for John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning, because when you look at this team on a nightly basis, they did not stick to things that worked for them in previous wins, or they did not really try to adapt to how other teams were playing. And I think that was the most frustrating thing for a lot of Lightning fans. And I think to outsiders who were watching this team, it maybe they looked at it as though maybe the Lightning have lost a step due to, obviously the last couple of years making deep playoff runs, winning 2 Stanley Cups in the span of 9 months. A lot has been made about just the toll that has been on this team with playing through COVID, playing the most games out of any other team in the last, I believe it was 4 years. So, that takes a toll. And I think once you start to see the Lightning kind of unfold in certain games, especially when they would go out and play against the Florida Panthers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Boston, other powerhouses of the East like the Rangers, and when you see them in those matchups and they don't look like the same old Lightning, a lot of people probably folded on them probably by December. Let's be honest. If anyone was a listener back then to Locked On NHL, I think really every Thursday to a certain point was just Tampa Bay Lightning therapy hour for me, because I would just air my grievances. I would talk about how this team really at certain points throughout the season didn't really look like they deserved to make the playoffs. Because, as we've seen, like I said, a lot has been made about how, the fatigue that this team has. But at the same time, you can't really have fatigue as an excuse when you're going out there, you're not playing well, and it's not due to physical mistakes. It's mental mistakes, Armando. And then you go out the next night and you roll up a big win against the Boston Bruins in a tight-knit game. So, I think really what it came down to with this Lightning team in terms of just the national perspective was that people just didn't think that they had anything in them. I certainly at times was in that boat as well. And you kind of saw, especially in that playoff series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, in which Lightning lost in 5, that really they were just outmatched. They had nothing left. But like you said, set a lot of personal records this year. But you know what? It was a bumpy ride to get there. The numbers might look good, but the process wasn't exactly pretty.
Yeah, and when you look at and when people talk about that series with the Tampa Bay Lightning, even Mikhail Sergachev spoke about it on Russian radio, talking about how they celebrated their win against Tampa Bay only to get smacked as well, and it's kind of deserving what they got after the fact as well. And a lot of people argued that even the Tampa Bay Lightning played better than the Toronto Maple Leafs in that series too. Just the bounces didn't go the way that they needed to as well. And spoke about and just like Bill Zito, Julian Breezewell likes to get contracts signed a year ahead before it's too late. Like Sorelli's contract's kicking in, Sergachev, Chernak, and all. So like we said at the top, the Bills came due. So it comes with losing guys as well, and also going for it once again, and talk about a perfect time for the Tampa Bay Lightning to go to only lose a few games in February, which put them in a position to buy a Tanner Jeannot, even though a lot of people had a lot to say about what they gave up for him. I mean, you still have Brandon Hagel, who's going to be an RFA this coming off season as well. A lot of expiring contracts, which both teams have in common, but not a lot of money to be distributed around as well for the Tampa Bay Lightning, just like the Florida Panthers as well. So that's really a situation that both teams definitely find themselves in. But man, it's just you still expect this team to just to still have, with the leadership in place, like Kucherov, Stamkos, Point, Hedman, even though sometimes he struggles with injuries here and there, they still ride that ship for sure out in Tampa Bay. But yeah, it's just and also with the bill coming due, I can't see a situation where Stamkos leaves. I think he's going to pull Patrice Bergeron and take like a hometown discount and stay there for a little bit longer. Maybe get some term as well. But I don't think they're gonna be paying him at 8.6. But I can't see a situation where he's not a Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on Stamkos. I think that if the Lightning were going to trade him at any point, they would have done that probably 2-3 years ago. Or even then, they probably would have let him walk when he was a UFA last time. But with Stamkos, I think really the big question is not if he's going to stay. I think a lot of Lightning fans, including myself, are really going to ask out loud, what kind of role is he going to play? He had a little bit of a setback year this year. You kind of saw his age play a factor. He's still in his early 30s. So, but then again, when you've been playing in the pros since the age of 18, it does take a toll on you, especially with the amount of injuries that he has had. But I think that and that goes back into the frustrating parts of this season was that, John Cooper, as much as he tried to get this team to adapt, he did not adapt himself either. He constantly played Steven Stamkos at the first line, especially when he would go weeks without scoring. We saw a little bit of a uptick in his production, though, as the season came to a close, which was really a positive thing to see, especially, a guy like that. I think we could both agree, Armando, that really he's got one move, and that's a one-timer from the circle. And what's the old saying? If it still works, don't fix it. But it wasn't working. And we kind of saw it in the playoffs too, as well. Everybody knew it was coming. And, whether it's a case of, maybe him just not having as much zip on his shot, or maybe just teams are now just selling out on that cross ice pass to where they know it's going to go to 91 in the circle. But we saw him kind of evolve towards the end. He started to score more from the danger area, which was really great to see, especially for a player, like I said, at this point in his career. But I'm curious to see what the conversation will be had going into this offseason if they don't get some sort of extension done, whether it's before this season or maybe next season, or maybe at some point during the regular season, what kind of role he will have. Yeah, he's the captain. He is the cornerstone of this franchise. He will go down as the greatest player in franchise history. But he's not going to be a first line forward. I hope that's the case. I hope he understands and he, everything you hear about Stamkos these days is that he is down to earth, and I'm sure he will take a hometown discount as well as kind of be realistic about where he's going, where his career is going, and what role he has to play. So I think when he does come back, when he does sign that deal, you will definitely see him maybe in a different position, if not this season, but definitely next season.
Yeah, and to think that Stevie Y allowed him to test free agency, and then and as nervous as that was for a lot of Lightning fans, he still ended up back with the franchise. But got 2 Stanley Cups out of it and 3 Eastern Conference appearances in that span, and even one prior in 2015. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 2. We're gonna have Adam ask me some Florida Panthers related questions in this special crossover edition of Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Tampa Bay Lightning. But first, we're going to tell you all about AG1. And our next partner is a daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health, and I drink it literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because if you are from the South Florida area or even Tampa area, you know that there's one thing that drives that region, and that is Cuban coffee, whether it's a colada, a cortadito, café con leche. That those places thrive with that on Cuban coffee. And sometimes you need a little bit of a break, and sometimes that's where AG1 comes into play. And sometimes I drink it in the morning before my workout, and it makes me feel great. And you guys should give it a try too. And if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out.
All right, Armando. So you asked me some questions. I still think it's the Lightning therapy hour. I'm still kind of work out this past season, but I want my listeners to kind of know, and especially about what the next, I guess, big dog in the state of Florida is, because, when you look at the Florida Panthers, I mean, I think I speak for everyone, not only Lightning fans, but the rest of the NHL fan base, and how surprised we were for your guys to make a big run. But before we get into that, I want to thank all of our listeners, Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning fans, for making us their first listen of the day. And if they haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to both podcasts. But I mean, where do we start? I mean, let me just, I don't think I've spoken to you really since you guys made the Stanley Cup final. So just a little bit of a recap. I mean, you know, my listeners have heard numerous times, and I'm sure yours has when we've done the crossovers when the Lightning have gone. But I mean, what is it like? You know, I kind of forgot what it was like to go to the Stanley Cup final on a run for the first time in some time. But just, you know, raw emotion. What was going through your head? Did you have any expectation in terms of once this team kind of turned ahead, you kind of knew that the run was kind of going to take you there to the final, or was just every game a surprise?
I think once they beat the Maple Leafs, I kind of had the belief that there was the possibility of winning at all, even for this team. But you know, when you look at this from a broader perspective, a macro perspective, when you look at the building blocks that it got to get here, I mean, there is a saying that sometimes your sibling makes you a little better. And in that case, it was the Tampa Bay Lightning for the Florida Panthers. And as painful as that game 2 loss was, where Ross Colton scored that goal where Mackenzie Weegar and Gus Forsling go behind the net, and then Nikita Kucherov gets it to Ross Colton for that game winner. It was, we didn't know at the time, but that was the start of a little bit of acceptance that you couldn't win with the group that they had, and that's what forced the trade for Matthew Tkachuk as well. And you know, when you get swept when winning the President's Trophy, you know, sometimes you got to look at yourself in the mirror a little bit. But the fact that there's still some of the core there, Barkov, Ekblad, even though he regressed a little bit last season, the goalie Sergei Bobrovsky, who could turn it up a notch anytime he wants, it feels at times, even though we've seen our fair share of bad Bobrovsky as well. And one thing that doesn't get talked about as well is an experienced coach. Even though this fan base was not a fan of the hire in the first place, I was going to give Paul Maurice a chance, no doubt. And yeah, people are going to say, oh, if Chicago did not beat Pittsburgh, yada yada yada, but that didn't happen. They were in, and really, I had a feeling that after they won Game 6 against Boston, I had a feeling that they were gonna win Game 7 on the road, especially with the goalie change. That's how you knew that you were in the heads of the coaching staff, especially head coach Jim Montgomery. But like I said earlier, when they beat the Maple Leafs was when I thought that they were going to make that run to the final. And really, and all the criticism of Matthew Tkachuk not being a playoff performer when he was playing in Calgary and all, he really shut those people up, especially how he performed in the Eastern Conference Final, getting 3 out of 4 game-winning goals as well. And Sergei Bobrovsky, what can you say? You know it with Andrei Vasilevsky. You win in this league with goaltending. That's really what the Florida Panthers really how they got to their winning ways in the postseason was that reliable backstop in Sergei Bobrovsky. And then it's crazy how this team went from high scoring offense to these close 3-2, 2-1 games. But that's the formula. That's how you win in this league. And sometimes it stresses you out when it's like, man, why can't they finish? Why is puck luck not on their side? Even sometimes those thoughts go into your head. But when you have a reliability on the backstop, and even guys who we complained about in the regular season, like Mark Stahl at the time, he performed well in the postseason as well. Brandon Montour put up such great offensive numbers as well, especially in the first half of the postseason. He stepped it up a notch as well. And just the game gets tighter. The slot isn't open as much in the postseason, and the fact that the Panthers were able to just dig deep and find different ways to win, and getting in those dirty areas as well, it feels like it's something that can be sustainable. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, everyone, I think, Lightning fan or not, was immensely impressed by this team, and you brought him up. I mean, the big focus point when everybody was watching a Florida Panthers game was Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, his performance was unbelievable. A lot was made in the offseason when the Florida Panthers made that traded Jonathan Huberdeau, the reigning probably at that time, I think one of the best players, if not the best scorer on your team. Um, in a trade to Calgary, where Calgary looked like they were blowing it up, you get Matthew Tkachuk back. I believe you guys also signed him to a long-term deal, if I'm not mistaken, at that point.
Him and Barkov's contracts expired in the same year, which works perfectly. So maybe like Taze and Kane a little bit. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, you got a long way to go before you can stack up against those guys. But I mean, Tkachuk, 20 games played, 11 goals, 24 points, 74 minutes of penalties, which led all players in the playoffs, as well as, like you said, 4 game-winning goals, which was also a Stanley Cup playoff high. And really, what was it about Tkachuk? And I'm not even talking about the playoffs, because it's not about what you do, I think, to a certain degree in the playoffs. It's how you get there, because I think it's one thing, if Lightning, my listeners know, is the thing that's really annoyed me the last couple of years with Tampa Bay Lightning is their mantra of let's not worry about the regular season. Let's just get in, and then we could do what we normally do. And I think, though, that was a huge factor as to why they weren't successful as they normally are in the Stanley Cup playoffs, because they did not have a good regular season. But what was it really about the regular season with Matthew Tkachuk and another name that you brought up, who I was immensely impressed with, Sergei Bobrovsky? What was it about those two guys regular seasons, that really you think prepared them going into the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Well, I want to start with Bobrovsky. His regular season was okay as far as that. Spencer Knight had a few starts here and there, had a big stretch before going on the players assistance program. Bobrovsky got stretched his groin in Montreal back in I believe it was January, if I'm not mistaken. And Alex Lyon had to start a few games. There was a point where the tandem was Alex Lyon and Matt Guzda for the Florida Panthers as well. Alex Lyon, let's also praise Alex Lyon for helping the Florida Panthers get to the playoffs as well. Let's not forget that as well. And really, it was really after Game 4 against the Boston Bruins where it really turned on for Sergei Bobrovsky. But as far as Matthew Tkachuk, he was getting the points when necessary, even in the beginning of the season, even when they weren't winning. But even the enthusiasm, even speaking to the media, even after games, we're about staying the course, about still trusting in one another. And also, let's also not forget that that was year 1 in a new system as well, and a new coaching staff as well. So it was always going to take some time to mesh. And it really changed in Toronto in mid-March, when in the middle of a review that the goal was disallowed for Toronto, that Paul Maurice went on an epic rant, and one of the few people who was actually looking Paul Maurice in the eye was Matthew Tkachuk as well, and a product of a guy whose father played in the league as well, was taught how to be the ultimate professional too. So we can't forget how valuable that whole thing with his father being Keith Tkachuk, and of course Keith Tkachuk going on Toronto radio calling the Panthers soft. You think that motivated the Panthers? And no doubt it did. But yeah, it was definitely something that really helped propel that team to take that next step. I mean, they went on a 6-game losing skid in the middle. 4-game losing skid in the middle of in the latter part of March, before winning, going 6-1-1 in the last 8 games to get to the postseason. They were fighting and clawing every night for this team. Felt like a playoff game for the Panthers, and it really started to adjust. They really started to adjust as far as in between periods, and learned how to come back in games too, because it wasn't really until late January where they had their first win after trailing after 2 periods. So when they would fall behind early in the season and going into that third period, it was it was 100% of the time an L for the team as well. But that didn't really change until prior to the All-Star break as well for this team. And then they came out firing a 7-1 win over the Tampa Bay Lightning just coming out of the All-Star break too as well. So that was definitely a big start for the Panthers in propelling them to making the postseason.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, the story doesn't start in the postseason as much as you would think, from Quest for the Cup. It really starts from game one of the regular season. But now that you've gotten to the point to where you have a pretty good, feel for what this team is capable of, what this team could do. And I think that's one of the positives that, a lot of fans, whether you're a Panther fan or a fan of another team that fell short in the playoffs, falling short in the playoffs isn't the worst thing as long as you continue to get better, because at least you have a sense of what the bare minimum that could be accomplished with that current group. So my next question was originally going to be, what do you think is next? What pieces need to be fixed or improved upon? But I just remembered that, you guys signed one of my favorite players in the league, believe it or not, is Oliver Ekman-Larsson to a pretty nice deal. Now, what can you tell Lightning fans, because we'll be getting a good view of him this upcoming season? What can Lightning fans not really look forward to, but what could they expect from OEL this year in Southern Florida?
Well, truth be told, because of a long playoff run, and yes, injuries can be more revealed once the postseason is over. I mean, Ekblad had a whole bunch of injuries, a broken foot, dislocated shoulder. Brandon Montour had a torn labrum, so they're going to miss some time coming into the regular season this year. So Oliver Ekman-Larsson is going to play a huge role in the Florida Panthers. And he's maybe going to be the quarterback on the power play, either him or Gus Forsling as well. Going to play some top pair minutes. It's not something that you want to have long term as OEL being on the top unit, but as far as if there's a guy who you want for a temporary period of time to be there while the other guys get healthy, then yeah, a guy who was a captain as well back in Arizona / Phoenix. So definitely a guy who could definitely bring it as far as that. On the defensive end, maybe not so much, but definitely on offensive end can really help. And the best signing for the Florida Panthers, in my opinion, was Evan Rodriguez as a guy who can be on the second power play unit, has played with Nathan McKinnon, has played with Sidney Crosby as well. And definitely his career has definitely skyrocketed, even though he's a late bloomer as well. Dmitry Kulikov is back for the Panthers after being away for half a decade as well, and they got a little bit beefier with bringing in Nico Mikkola in because they were not going to sign Radko Gudas to a 3x4 as well. So so they got a little beefier. They made a few lateral moves as far as the defense as well, and brought in Steven Lorentz, who's going to be on that fourth line as well for the Panthers. A little bit of a bigger guy than Duclair is, a guy who's more of a Duclair being more of a speedster. I think the Florida Panthers were trying not necessarily to go away from it, but just wanted to get a little bit bigger because they got bullied during the final. So that's something that they want to definitely fix.
Yeah, like I said, falling short in the playoffs isn't always a bad thing, just because it kind of lets you reassess what you need to do and what you need to kind of amp up on your team. And I agree with you. You look back at that finals against Vegas. I mean, it was a tall order, I think, for anyone coming out of the East to beat that Vegas team, who was just not only just big, but just fast and just very good at really every facet of the game. So, the fact that you guys didn't get swept, I think, is a testament to how good you guys were, believe it or not. Because, just if you look at all the other possible teams coming out of the East, I don't think that they would have been able to last any longer than the Panthers did. So, but you know what? I'm very interested and very curious to see what this team looks like on the ice and I'm very curious as well to see how the Lightning could probably stack up against them over the course of a couple of meetings this season.
No doubt. And for this upcoming season as well, with a whole lot of changes with both teams, like saying they're instead of them being hunting, they're going to be the hunted. They're going to be the hunted. I mean, the Lightning have been the hunted for a while now. The Florida Panthers, nobody is going to sleep on them anymore, especially what they've done in the last 2 seasons. So, I mean, other teams have gotten better. I mean, Montreal, I mean, yeah, they're still rebuilding as well, but they're the 3 teams that a lot of media guys all talk about of which one of these 3 teams are going to take that next step as far as Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit. Yeah, Detroit got Alex DeBrincat, who's a 2-time 40-goal scorer. It plays bigger than his size as well, but there's still health concerns as far as a Jacob Chikrin, a Josh Norris as well. Jonas Korpisalo hasn't played a full season, but can we see Bubble Korpisalo as well? And Buffalo, they're still a young team. Rasmus Dahlin has finally come on the scene for the Sabres. Owen Power is still on his entry level deal. Does Devin Levi get a big load of the games in Buffalo as well? That's a big question mark. I thought they were going to go after maybe a Connor Hellebuck or John Gibson even as well. And like we said, Detroit, Ville Husso was great. That was a great trade that they made for Ville Husso. James Reimer being a backup, and Alex Lyon, 2 former Panthers being the second and third goalie for the Detroit Red Wings as well. And also, I don't know how to put my finger on the Boston Bruins as well. Losing Bergeron, Krejci as well. Charlie Coyle is probably going to be your first line center as well. So, but at the same time, Marchand's still there. McAvoy's still there as well. Hampus Lindholm. They got the Jennings Trophy tandem in Linus Allmark and Jeremy Swayman as well, and Jim Montgomery, who's who won the Jack Adams last year. That one's harder to figure out. We expect the Lightning and Panthers to make the postseason. So this third segment is not about where do we expect them, because I think we know, and I think our listeners know too. And Toronto, lateral moves. They still have their core 3, maybe. Well, core 4. It could be core 3 depending on what happens with William Nylander and his contract situation as well. But this could be an even more challenging division than it was last year at times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been saying for the last couple of seasons that it's only a matter of time before the Detroit Red Wings catch up to everybody else. They've slowly been making moves. Stevie Y has been slowly just revamping that minor league system, as well as just bringing in players that he knows are going to be useful for the foreseeable future. I think I speak for everyone when the DeBrincat trade went down. I was blown away by how they were able to pull that off. Ville Husso,
anything.
And the Ville Husso trade. I can't believe that. I think Stevie Y needs to be brought up on charges, because that was an absolute steal for them. I know that how corny that sounds, but I mean that moment in time. Come on, like Ville Husso. A lot of people, I thought, including myself, probably thought that he was going to be the next starting goaltender in St. Louis. Everything that's going on with Bennington. But no, St. Louis foolishly trades him away, which to this day I'm still mystified as to why they would do such a thing. And he goes to Detroit, who's up and up. And then you look at, I agree with you with Boston. I don't know how to feel about them. I mean, I said the same thing going into last season. Oh, they're old. Oh, they're washed up. Their time is over. And they set all these records, which is individually and as a team, which is ridiculous. And we kind of all knew what was going to happen in the playoffs. But still, I agree with you. I don't know. I'm not comfortable enough to say that they're going to have a repeat of the season. I'm not comfortable enough to say that they are a playoff team, but I'm also not comfortable enough to say that they are going to make the playoffs, because, who knows with Boston. I mean, all it takes is maybe one addition or one subtraction to make this team a whole lot better. As for the other teams in this division, Buffalo, I think, after becoming the third highest scoring team in the NHL last season, I think really all it comes down to is goaltending. I mean, you look at they scored 296 goals last year, and their plus minus was -4. So that shows you really where they need to kind of bolster up on that roster. At the same time, you look at, like you mentioned, what's going on up in Toronto. They bring back for the most part, their core. You don't know what's going to happen with Nylander. They signed Max Domi, which was a very interesting move within itself. I thought that was good, but at the same time, I feel like the vibe up in Toronto is so much more different than anywhere else in the league, to where I don't think you're going to see the team on the ice that what you get on paper. I think we could have both agree with that. That could be something that is very reasonable. But from this team, top to bottom, they really should go out there and win the division with no problem. But at the same time, you have the Lightning, you have the Florida Panthers, and you have a bunch of other teams who are on the up and up and could possibly very well challenge for that last divisional playoff spot. I mean, the only teams that really don't scare me are Ottawa and Montreal. If you asked me last year, maybe I would have said, maybe, Ottawa, but they're kind of going in an opposite direction. But I think if I had to, I don't know, I'm not going to make predictions, but all I could say from the Lightning perspective is that it's going to be a very, very difficult year. I've said it on my podcast that, the Lightning, not because necessarily that they may not play well, but it's because of how talented this division is. The Lightning may have to fight for a wild card spot as we're getting later into the season.
Yeah, the Panthers are no stranger to fighting for a wild card spot. And you spoke about Toronto and all that stuff. The vibe is different. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly left because of the media pressure in Toronto, and Radko Gudas decided not to sign anywhere, even in Canada, because of the pressure in that the media comes there as well, as far as that. So what we experience with our teams in Florida and how it's talked about, how it's perceived, a lot different than it is in different regions in the National Hockey League. But Adam, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this special crossover edition, catching up with our divisional foes. This definitely won't be our last crossover. We will be definitely meeting again for sure, but tell my listeners where they can follow you online.
Well, you could follow the show at LO_Lightning on Twitter. Are we calling it Twitter? Are we calling it X? A lot has changed since we last spoke. I guess it's X. You can follow us on there, Lockdown_Lightning on Instagram. Give us a follow on our YouTube page. You give me a follow at Danky Dank, DNKYD8NK. I will be continuing to talk about the state of the Lightning, whether it be off the ice, on the ice this upcoming season, as in the upcoming future as well. What is waiting around the corner for the Lightning in their minor league system as well. Armando, why don't you tell my listeners where they can find your show?
They can follow the show anywhere they listen to podcasts, and especially on YouTube. We're definitely growing in that area. And you can follow the show at LO_FLA Panthers on X. And you can follow it on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers, and myself personally at MondoMan12. So I want to thank you so much, Adam. And I will see you next time, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Armando.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Adam Denker. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.